Hey, we're learning how to break these things. What are these things? Well, they're some of these are what the Bible calls strongholds. I mean, it's not the occasional sin, but I mean it's sin that's entrenched. It's the Bible calls it a fortress. It's a thought, a belief, an emotion, or an action that the devil has tempted us with, and we fell for it, and we didn't confess it quickly, and so he was able to get us to fall for it again, and we didn't confess it, which is how we restore closeness with God, and we need closeness with God in order to resist temptation. And so before long, this is a repetitive thing in our life, whatever it is. But the Bible says they can be demolished. They can be broken. And we don't have to live with an evil fortress in our life. And that's what we're building towards, is to learn how to break those things. I'm going to tell you a story. Told you a story every week of this series. First of all, I need to know, how many of you know what Polish pottery is? You know what Polish pottery is? Okay. All right. Now here's where you get really honest. How many of you have some? How many of you have a lot? There's help for you, okay? Yes, my hand's up too, Rob. I feel for you. But I was suckered into it. Joyce was going to sell Polish pottery, so she had to buy a lot of it to sell. I think I bought it all, okay? But Polish pottery, if you don't know what it is, it's beautiful dishes that are all hand-painted in Poland. And they come all kinds of varieties. They're big bowls, they're baking dishes, they're plates, cups. They're even decorative crosses, decorative spoons. It's beautiful stuff, and all hand-painted. So no two pieces exactly alike, and color schemes and things vary. So it's really beautiful stuff. Well, we have a lot of it because Joyce was going to sell it. And one of her favorite pieces of Polish pottery is a candy dish about that big around, and it's attached to a pedestal that's about that tall. So this beautiful candy dish on a tall pedestal. And believe it or not, we actually keep candy in it, and Joyce keeps that thing on a countertop in the kitchen. Well, about 2 weeks ago, I went to get something, a piece of candy or an energy bar out of that dish. And behind the dish, just slightly leaning toward the wall, but obviously a very delicate balance, was a heavy wooden cutting board. And whenever I got that candy or whatever I got out of the dish, I somehow disturbed that delicate balance. And so the cutting board, instead of leaning toward the wall, began to lean toward the candy dish. And I had already walked away, and I picked up some things, and it caught my attention. And it was like watching a slow motion horror film. That cutting board just slowly tipped over and pushing that candy dish toward the edge of the counter. Now I'm going to stop there and just be honest. How many of you think that I broke it? Just be honest, how many of you think it broke? No faith in my ninja skills, huh? I mean, I could have just jumped over there. You don't know, and I won't tell you right now, but I'll tell you later whether it broke or not, okay? You might be surprised. But we're talking about breaking things that need to be broken. Here they are. The strongholds in our life, and they can be broken. Today, we're going to talk about wrong ways to deal with these things. There are some very common ways that we try to deal with strongholds that don't work. And so we're going to talk about those today. Now, we're not going to look up Scripture again, just in the interest of time, but it's on the outline. You can look it up later and study it, and it'll be up here on the screen for us to read. So first of all, we're going to look at Proverbs 20, verse 9. Proverbs 20, verse 9. Who can say, I have kept my heart pure? I am clean without sin. Can anyone here say that? You're clean, pure, without sin. Then why do we deny our problems sometimes? Denial is one of the techniques that people use. It doesn't work. We are good deniers. And yet, who can say that they're without sin? None of us. Which means we're all vulnerable to strongholds. Why? Because you remember how a stronghold starts? One sin. One sin can give the devil a foothold. And if we don't deal with that sin quickly and confess it and restore closeness with God so that we can resist it the next time, that's all he needs. And he's going to start a construction project in your life to build a fortress called a stronghold. So we all sin, so we're all vulnerable to these things. But we're such good deniers. You ever walk into a room where there's one child playing and something just got broken? I didn't do it. We learn at an early age. I didn't do it. We just deny it. You remember last week the story Joyce told? She got a little equal time last week and told you about the little remodeling project in a bathroom at our house, and I broke a pipe. She says I broke a pipe, and water sprayed out all over, and I got a shower, and the room got all wet, but it wasn't my fault. It was that little sharp metal thing around the pipe. I didn't do it. I was the only one in the room. But when the plumber came, and $100 later it was fixed, I told him, I said, man, I really think it's that sharp thingy right around the pipe there that did it. He mumbled something like sympathetically. Then I'm pretty sure I heard him say, you better stick to preaching. I didn't do it. See, we deny things, even when it's so obvious to many other people that we've got a problem. You know, people who have addictions, usually everybody knows it before they do, because that's one of the common responses is denial. I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem. Well, all strongholds, if you stop and think about it, are addictions of a sort, because they involve a recurring, repetitive sin of some kind. And it doesn't do any good to say, I don't have that problem, but that's what we do. So right now, just between you and God, are you denying anything in your life? You know it's there. God has revealed it to you, but you're playing the deny game. Just between you and him. And what are you willing to do about it today? It can be broken, but not through denial. All right, look at Luke 10:38 through 42 up here. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And so she came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sisters left me to do the work all by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. There's a principle in that story of how not to deal with strongholds, and it's called busyness. Sometimes people get so busy just to avoid dealing with something. It's not fair for us to say that Martha was busy because she was avoiding a stronghold. But the principle is there that her busyness kept her from dealing with what she really needed to be doing at that time. And there are people in this world, probably people in this room, who to avoid life, they stay busy. To avoid problems, they stay busy. To avoid facing who they really are and who God wants them to be, they stay busy and they keep busy. And that's what Martha did. And it kept her from sitting at the feet of Jesus. So between you and God right now, are you one of those busy people? Are you always looking for something to do just so that you don't have to face what's going on? Then you may have a stronghold and you're trying to deal with it the wrong way. Proverbs 14:12. There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. There's, I think, a little principle in there for how not to deal with strongholds. I think it's called rationalizing. You know what that means? I mean, it's a big fancy word for making up reasons why it's okay. And we're pretty good at that. Our sinful mind can explain away almost anything. We can come up with some doozy excuses and reasons why it's okay for me to do that. Let me tell you a story about a guy that rationalized something. I read this story about a guy who worked in an office, and just to be nice, about once a week or so, he would take donuts to the office staff. His route to work took him by a donut shop, and so he'd just stop, get some donuts, take them in, and share them. Well, as time went on, he decided, I've had a lot of donuts. It's probably time for me to go on a diet. And so he wanted accountability with his coworkers, and he didn't want them to think something funny that he stopped bringing donuts. So he announced all of them, hey, I'm going on a diet. I'm not going to be bringing donuts anymore, so don't tempt me with sweets. And about 3 weeks went by and no donuts. Then all of a sudden, he showed up one morning at work with a dozen donuts. And one of his coworkers said, what about your diet? Did you stop your diet? He said, oh, no, I'm still on my diet, but God told me it was okay to have a donut today. And the coworker said, well, how did God communicate that to you? How does that work? He said, oh, it's a miracle. He said, it's just a God story. He said, I drive by that donut shop every day on the way to work, and it's a busy place. And there's never any parking at the donut shop. And I just felt led to pray that morning, God, if you want me to have a donut today, let there be a parking spot open right in front of the donut shop. And he said, it was a miracle, because on my 8th trip around the block, there it was, right there. It was an open spot right there. We can make anything work out because we rationalize our behavior. We explain it away. But if you've got a stronghold in your life, you can make up all the reasons in the world, but it's not going to work. We need to go about these things the right way. I recently had a woman tell me, we can even make the Bible say what we want it to. I recently had a woman tell me that God himself had arranged things in her marriage so that it would be easier for her to get a divorce. That's what God wanted, and he had just arranged it in such a way that it would be real easy for her. Sorry, that sounds good, but it's not in the Bible. That's a rationalization. How many of you used this on your parents when you were young? Everybody else is doing it. Yeah, I hated my mom's response. We really did have a bridge in my town. And this high bridge, and her response was, well, if everybody else was jumping off the Cotter Bridge, would you do it? Oh, I hated that. And then I grew up and I became her, and I started to use that a gazillion times with my kids. Everybody else is doing it. Does that sound like a good excuse to God? That's just a rationalization for why we want to do it. Move on to Joshua chapter 7. Now, I'd have to read the whole chapter, and I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to summarize Joshua chapter 7, and we'll pull one more wrong way to deal with strongholds out of that. Joshua 7 picks up where the Israelites have crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land, and they've had their first victory, the Battle of Jericho. And it was a tremendous victory. But prior to the Battle of Jericho, God had given the Israelites some instructions, and he said, don't take any of the spoils or the plunder from Jericho for yourselves. Don't pick up any loose change. Don't take any valuables home. Don't take anything. Well, everybody obeyed that except one man named Achan, and he picked up some goodies and he took them home and buried them under his tent. Well, the next battle that was facing the Israelites was at the city of Ai. And Ai was a much weaker opponent than Jericho, had far fewer soldiers defending it. And so the Israelites were super confident. I mean, God had just given them a great victory. And they said, you know what, only take about 2,000 men over there to Ai and we'll beat them up real quick. It won't be a problem. We'll vastly outnumber them with just 2,000 men, and it'll be quick, and you'll be back in time for supper, something like that. And so they went over to Ai, and they got their tails kicked. The soldiers of Ai routed the Israelite army and killed a bunch of them and chased them for miles. And so they get back to the camp and there's despair. And finally God reveals to them, this is why you lost that battle. Because just one person disobeyed me about taking stuff from Jericho. And it cost many lives, and it cost a lot of hurt and pain, and it cost Achan his life. Now, let me tell you what I'm getting out of this, and then I'll explain how I get it. I think Achan is an example of minimizing, okay? And human beings were good at minimizing. I think Achan had the attitude of, well, it's just me. I won't take very much. I mean, how wrong can it be if just one guy takes some stuff? And I'm not going to take a whole lot, and nobody will even know, so it's not that bad. Minimize, minimize, minimize. Minimize the seriousness of sin. Minimize the danger. Minimize the risk. Minimizing sounds a lot like, well, no one's getting hurt. It's a private sin, so it's not like anybody's getting hurt. And at least I'm only looking at porn. I'm not actually out cheating. And, I only do it occasionally, and it's really not that bad. It's no big deal. I can stop anytime I want to. Minimize, minimize, minimize. It's pretty clear that won't help destroy any stronghold. And that's the attitude Achan had. And it led to disaster. Achan, hey, just one guy, take a few things, no big deal. How many of you really think I broke Joyce's favorite piece of Polish pottery? Be honest. How many of you think? Just no confidence in my cat-like ability to spring into action. But I did, man. I dropped all that stuff and I sprang across the room and I grabbed that thing and I saved it in my dreams. In reality, here's what I did. I'll confess it to you. I minimized the actual risk involved. I did some quick geometrical calculations in my head, and I figured that the length of that cutting board when it fell would not be sufficient to push the candy dish to the edge. So I minimized the risk, I minimized the potential danger, and it was like watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. By the time I realized my calculations were wrong, it was too late. And that thing just slowly fell and pushed it right off the edge and broke it into 100 pieces, all the king's horses and all the king's men. Couldn't put it together again. But I want you to know I have since paid for it. She went shopping in Montgomery yesterday, and so it probably cost me a lot more than that dish ever did. But I just kind of imagine that people do that very same thing in their life sometimes. Nobody's going to get hurt. My life's not going to fall off the counter. No, I won't let it go on that long. It's not that bad. I'll stop it before it gets there. But you know what? Sometimes you find yourself looking at a part of your life like it's in slow motion. And your plan to stop it is too late. And before long, a part of our life has fallen off the cliff and somebody does get hurt. That's because minimizing never helps deal with a stronghold. I don't know how you need to respond to any of this stuff, because I'm not smart enough, and it's not my job to know where you are in life. But I just know these are ways that people deal with strongholds that never work. We're going to get to 2 more wrong ways next week, and then we'll actually start on a long list of ideas, ways to help us break these things.